My career as a corporate director is in some ways very unconventional. I didn't choose it, it chose me.
In fact, it's not that easy to find your first board because many people search for a year, even 2 years.
A corporate director, first and foremost, is about reputation. Any rash decision leads to reputational losses.
Iryna, what makes working on boards interesting?
If you are deeply involved in a company's remarkable success, in its relentless and continuous growth, that's the exact happiness a corporate director feels.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the channel Boards of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin. Today our guest is Iryna Papusha. Iryna is a member and chair of Supervisory and Advisory Boards of Ukrainian and international companies, a mentor and a lecturer at the Kyiv School of Economics and International Institute of Management.
Good afternoon, Sergey. Thank you for the invitation. Let me make a small correction. I specifically teach corporate governance and also mentor in corporate governance. So this is my main professional activity.
Iryna is a well-known specialist and expert in corporate governance in Ukraine and beyond. And that's why today we're going to talk with her about a career on boards of directors, because quite a few executives reach out who are planning to finish their executive careers and want to transition to non-executive roles. Other top managers also reach out, including recently chief HR officers and chief finance officers. I'm sure it will be interesting and useful for them to get insights on how to build a career in this direction. Iryna, what drew your attention to boards? Because you were an executive, the CEO of a large company, and after that you moved specifically into non-executive roles, namely onto boards of directors, supervisory boards, and advisory boards. What specifically attracted your attention to this line of work?
In fact, my entire professional career as a corporate director has been very untraditional, quite unconventional, and truly unique. It wasn't me who chose it, but rather it chose me. Exactly 10 years ago, this is an anniversary year for me, 2025, I was offered to head the supervisory board at the company I had previously restructured, bringing it almost out of bankruptcy. At that time, I was working as the deputy chairman of the executive board at Kyiv Klib, and one of its divisions, the Kyiv BKK, a huge confectionery company, had been restructured. And the owner offered me, in addition to my executive role, to also serve as the chair of the supervisory board of this company. And later, when I was facing the question of my second marriage, and my second marriage is to a foreigner, I had to figure out how I could both live between two countries and continue my professional activity, self-fulfillment, and demand. That's when I realized that it was truly a gift of fate when I was offered the chance to try out a role on the supervisory board. At that point, I already understood what such work entailed. I had a vision of what I needed to study and develop in order to truly focus solely on this, rather than constantly switching hats from executive to non-executive. And at that moment, I made the decision that this would become my main professional activity. I went to study to improve myself to master this field as much as possible. And now it's been 10 years that I've been a corporate governance expert, if I can put it that way.
So, despite having some management experience in top positions, even experience working on a board of directors, you still decided to go study?
I actually believe that it's essential, and there are no requirements anywhere regarding the education of corporate directors. But I believe it should be part of some internal code of a corporate director that learning is a mandatory principle. And not just completing a program, but ongoing, continuous learning. And when I say learning, I don't just mean going to schools that teach corporate governance. Currently, there are 2 of them in Ukraine. Fortunately, other business schools have started introducing courses. I know that even KMBS invited you. Yes, I am now teaching in corporate governance at the Kyiv School of Economics and at the Business School of International Institute of Management. But this is just the beginning, and these are fairly short-term programs. Just like UCGA and CGPA, which specialize in training corporate directors, these are short-term programs. And when I talk about continuous learning, again, I don't just mean going to study at other schools. By the way, I graduated from Harvard Business School under the Corporate Director program. I studied as a board chair at INSEAD. Right now, I tend to focus more on continuous improvement through reading, using various online resources, articles, communication, peer-to-peer interactions to analyze cases, identify issues, solve these problems, and exchange experiences, joining different communities and learning from that experience. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, we have a situation where, by the way, we don't have any books at all published in Ukraine about supervisory boards or advisory boards. There are books, actually I found only 2 on corporate governance, but these are more about legal corporatization rather than corporate governance as governance. Currently, in Ukraine, there are no platforms where corporate directors can communicate with each other. There are alumni communities of graduates from CGPA and UCGA, and that's already a fantastic example of a place where we can discuss our issues. But this needs to be developed further. This field is so young in Ukraine, and it is so important for us to adopt international experience where this has been happening for decades that we need to join these communities. You are familiar with the community I invited you to, the international ones. There are many of them, and you need to choose and be part of this international corporate governance community.
And corporate governance does not stand still. It is also evolving, including new technologies on the one hand, and on the other hand, new approaches. Because lately we are seeing more and more hands-on behavior from boards, from board members, not just hands-out, but more hands-on, more of a private equity approach and so on. And this is really very interesting. And I run a channel where I create digests of articles that, in my opinion, are interesting for board members. And almost every day I publish a digest of some article or research. I've been doing this for about a year now.
I'm a reader of your channel. You do an incredible job, both in terms of this YouTube channel where we can share our experiences and listen to the experiences of others, and in terms of reviewing the materials you share there. I'm very, very grateful to you for this.
Iryna, thank you so much. Thank you very much. It's pleasant and it inspires me to continue this work. And I asked myself, okay, at some point this has to end. That is, the flow of interesting information, articles and research in one way or another won't be as intense because after all, it's a fairly established field with a long history. And probably at the beginning, there will be quite a lot of interesting articles and research, but then their number will be gradually reduced. Actually, no, I'm noticing now that there are more and more very interesting new challenges and new approaches and new information. So indeed, learning and staying up to date with all the latest information is really very important.
I agree with you. In fact, it's not an exhaustive stream of information. First of all, it's constantly being updated. Yes, there are always new challenges and new technologies, but I've noticed another trend. I started going through cases and books, in fact, from a decade or even 2 ago, reviewing them, sorting through some of my old notes. I realize how relevant all of this is again, some case from the late 90s or the 2000s, and it almost exactly describes the situation we have today. Or some axioms from corporate governance textbooks from the early 2000s. They are highly applicable to the current situation in Ukraine. So I don't think your source of inspiration will ever run dry.
After you had decided to focus exclusively on non-executive roles, you probably had certain biases or common illusions related to working on boards and their operations. Was that the case?
I would say that it wasn't really illusions, but rather, at first, it was just an incomplete understanding of what it actually is. In 2015, when I had just started down this path, there wasn't much information available yet about boards, so I probably can't really speak to any illusions. As for biases, what biases do I see now? And they are more likely not from corporate directors, but from owners and top managers. Top managers look at board members as people who don't really understand what's going on because they're not immersed in the business, and how can they, coming to meetings once a month or even less often, really understand what's happening? Yes, so top management doesn't really respect board members in terms of their understanding of the business. Owners have a different bias because the whole category of boards has been somewhat discredited. There are a lot of unsuccessful cases, and so owners, knowing about these cases and discussing them, have become very cautious about boards. I refer to this as the manicurist coach phenomenon, which occurs when individuals, often without any formal training or adequate preparation, began to rapidly enter and establish themselves within this field rather quickly. I wouldn't say without experience, but specifically without due preparation. And that's why I keep emphasizing the need not just for education, but for real preparation. This preparation can come from an experienced mentor or advisor, but it's essential to understand how to structure the work of a board in order not to perpetuate the negative reputation that already exists regarding the discrediting of corporate governance.
Let's suppose there's a top manager who decides to move into non-executive roles and start working on boards. He has completed the training. How can he find his first position on a board?
There's a well-known phrase, and I'm sure you'll agree, it's networking, first and foremost. You need to communicate with people who are involved in corporate governance, who are already serving on boards or forming boards, or who operate and interact in circles where these issues are relevant. In other words, through people they can recommend you. And again, if you have prepared, worked with a mentor, or found yourself in communities specifically created for the development of corporate governance, and you announce your readiness to join boards, you may be recommended. Or there are consultants who create boards and select candidates for supervisory boards. They usually always have a list of people, their own database. I think you have such a database too. I definitely have one. It is constantly being updated and expanded. That is, people who have been in this field for a long time sometimes even form teams of those they want to work with, or they have a very long list in reserve of people who already have experience or are ready for a board position with certain expertise. So first, networking. Second, being ready to present yourself as a board-ready candidate in public channels. I mean LinkedIn, I mean a properly crafted CV. It should be different from a regular executive position CV. And talk about it, yes, that you want to attend certain industry-specific conferences. Talk to owners and say that you would like to try yourself on a board. Sometimes there are candidates who are even willing to take their first position for free just to try themselves out. The main thing is not to let this last too long. One very good approach is to join the supervisory board of a non-profit organization. It's easier to get in there, the selection process isn't as strict, and they don't always require experience. And most importantly, there's currently a strong trend in the market of members leaving supervisory and advisory boards, especially in the non-profit sector. Because time is getting tighter, the workload is increasing, and people are simply starting to give up those volunteer activities that begin to take up more time than their paid work. And that's why there is demand. You can definitely find a position there without a lot of prior experience. It's a good place to start. But keep in mind that boards in non-profit organizations are focused on achieving somewhat different goals, and their experience won't be 100% relevant to commercial boards.
Some potential candidates are looking for their first board position in order to gain experience. They start searching for their first board with a lot of energy, reaching out and sharing information about their desire to join. But over time, when they realize that it's actually not so easy to find that first position, since many people have searched for their first board for a year or even 2 years. That can happen as well. For example, I found my first board a year and a half after I started looking. Many people give up along the way and return to executive roles. How do you think one could keep themselves in shape in order to continue these searches and in order to still somehow find inspiration for pursuing a non-executive work?
On the one hand, it's probably hard for me to answer this question because I suppose I'm a fortunate person when it comes to professional self-fulfillment. Usually I have more offers than I can handle, and I often have to turn some down. Yes, it's a tough choice, but it does happen. On the other hand, I think this is also a kind of professional resilience. If you've already firmly decided to move in this particular direction and you are diligently preparing for it, perhaps by studying, actively networking, then you simply need to stay on that chosen path. That is all that is required. There's little difference whether you're looking for a job as a CEO, some other C-level top manager, or even a lower position. Do you have a goal? Move towards that goal. The position of board member is no different. Okay? At the same time, you need to provide for your family, and you're no longer a young specialist who is only responsible for yourself. Start doing something in corporate governance as well, but in parallel, do consulting. You may not have joined a board, but you can always find a company you can consult on the matters on which you have expertise. Start joining some programs where you might not be the main player, but you can be an assistant. But this will give you the opportunity to gain experience and at the same time speed up your path, shortening it to getting the position. It could be as an assistant. Yes, you can even start somewhere as a corporate secretary. Sometimes such corporate secretaries are even cooler than board members. I know at least one like that. I work with him and I'm truly proud of it.
So it's probably really a kind of early burnout. This is actually one of the mistakes that candidates who see their future in non-executive roles can make. What other mistakes can there be?
It's not so much a mistake as it is a problem. Like when someone is simultaneously working in an executive position, for example, as a company CEO, but at the same time, this person has already planned out their next path. And this person realizes that they want to work in a non-executive role. And right at the beginning, the first or second non-executive position, while still holding an executive role in parallel, is a huge challenge. As I already mentioned, it's about changing hats. The mind doesn't always cooperate or help because if you're already used to being a CEO, feeling like a fish in water when it comes to operations, and suddenly you have to take your hands out of the operational side and look at everything purely from a strategic level. That's not easy. By the way, that was my main challenge when I worked both on an executive position and on non-executive role. And what helps here is to train yourself, even before you step onto the path of a board member, to think exclusively strategically and to delegate. This skill of delegation, it's always useful, but if you've already made the decision to move into a non-executive career, then this really has to be something you wake up and go to sleep sleep with? How much have I delegated? And this delegation should actually distance the candidate from operational activities and elevate them exclusively to a strategic role. And then it will be easier to make the transition and, again, not slip back into operational activities.
That was the biggest challenge for me as well, because during the first board meetings, I constantly wanted to take the wheel and steer things myself.
Absolutely. Roll up your sleeves and get to work. Yes.
Iryna, what makes working on boards interesting? What kind of reward does it offer? Does it provide any intangible rewards to a board member?
That's quite a multifaceted question, because a board member doesn't directly influence the company's results. But I would say it's something that falls into the category of your legacy, because corporate governance doesn't affect short-term results. It's not about monthly, quarterly, or even annual profit reports. It's about building a system for the company's development over a decade or more. It's about sustainable, continuous growth. If you are connected to the company's success, to its relentless growth and scaling, and even if you no longer work at that company, your terms have all ended. But you look and see, it keeps developing. That's the pride, the happiness that a corporate director probably experiences and feels. Belonging to something big, where you contributed not just your hands, that's operational work, but your mind.
That gives you a real boost. Probably also communicating with entrepreneurs, with business owners. Each of them is a unique personality, especially in our circumstances.
I would say even more broadly. Working on boards, a corporate director has the opportunity to work in different sectors at the same time. Honestly, I don't know what could be more valuable or interesting than cross-sector knowledge, cross-sector technologies, and the opportunities for development at the intersection of different industries and fields of science. All of this together is what creates innovative approaches. And it's precisely boards that provide the opportunity, first of all, to do this simultaneously, and secondly, when changing positions, to gain this experience in very different industries. And besides that, thank you for highlighting this aspect of communicating with owners and with fellow board members who are powerful leaders with incredible experience behind them. It's an incredible enrichment to be and work alongside such strong personalities and professionals.
And probably aside from the positive aspects, there are certain challenges as well. For example, some board members who started working in this direction did not expect it would take up so much time. That is, the level of involvement in the boards is very high, and accordingly, a lot of time needs to be devoted to this work.
This is probably one of the illusions, yes, that you mentioned, that working on the boards is just about attending meetings, which, well, once a month doesn't seem like much, but before the meeting, you first have to actually study the business itself. Secondly, you have to constantly keep your finger on the pulse, study these industries worldwide, see how things work, and explore related or even unrelated sectors where you might find some innovative approaches. This includes reviewing reports, all the preliminary questions regarding these reports, communication with top managers, and then the follow-up discussions. In addition, there is also communication with independent directors. Okay, now I'm stepping into the territory of the board chair, but that also takes time. And in fact, the actual meeting itself is just the tip of the iceberg. And beneath that peak, the part visible above the water, there's a massive block of time, energy, and effort required to be competent, to be an expert, and to make decisions. Because the board is about making decisions. It's not about just sitting around and sharing your opinion. It's about coming in and making a well-founded decision that will then determine the direction of the company's development and its future.
Many board members often face a common situation where they tend to join virtually every single board they are generously invited to, and as a direct consequence, they frequently start joining 5, 6, or even 7 boards, and then they gradually come to the realization that it was probably a significant mistake to accept every single offer that came their way. And well, personally, I left 3 boards this year, precisely because I decided that it's important to be more selective and to focus not only on quantity, but most importantly on quality.
A corporate director is above all about reputation. Any ill-considered decision leads to reputational damage. So, this is probably one of the pieces of advice for beginners, to choose boards very carefully, both in terms of quantity, as you mentioned, because it is time-consuming, and in terms of quality, because just joining and leaving is not really the right approach. It's better to think things through very carefully on the shore before getting into that boat and starting the journey. If you have doubts that the board in this company won't deliver results, boards, then maybe you shouldn't try to jump in just because you received an offer. As for the number of boards, there definitely can't be too many. I know there are people on the market who serve on up to 9 boards. I can't imagine how that's even possible. I feel like my capacity and overall energy level are very high. But at the moment when I was on 5 boards, and these were really big companies, and I also had public activities, but my main professional work as well, those 5 boards were just too much. That was last year, and at the end of the year I made the decision to leave one of the boards, consciously. It was interesting, by the way, what criteria I used to choose. They were all great, all 5 boards were great, and I realized that I absolutely had to let go of one because I was overwhelmed. Okay, maybe it's also because my public activities took up some of my time, but still, it's impossible to professionally take on more than you can handle. And so, if we go back to the question of what criteria I used to choose, I gave up the board that was the easiest. And the one I spent no less time on, and which in terms of financial indicators per hour was quite attractive, maybe not the most attractive, but definitely more interesting than a few of the others. But in this particular board, I honestly did not perceive great prospects or the owner's significant potential for future development that would genuinely allow the board to effectively move the company in the optimal direction it could truly go. Yes, so in that case, the issue was a lack of readiness. I realized that, and that was my choice. But I really resonate with the idea of cutting back. Yes, you always need to review this regularly, because you can't trade quality for quantity.
Very interesting. I also had my own methodology. I carefully and self-critically analyzed how much added value I create for each company according to my own assessments. I left the boards of those companies where I realized that at that point, the added value I was providing was not as significant as it could have been. And in some of those boards, I worked for 3 years, in others for 4. But these boards were fully formed, meaning there were other board members. And I understood that without me, the board would continue to function normally, to work as usual, almost without losing momentum, or again, the added value that the board generates. Perhaps later, the board chair or the owners, instead of leaving the position open, will bring another person onto the board.
Look, you've just brought up a very important criterion for replacing board members, whether it's initiated by shareholders, owners, or conversely, when a corporate director themselves feels that they have already poured so much of their core, let's say blood, knowledge, and experience into the company that, in principle, it's time to step aside for the next person so that the company can be enriched even more. That's actually very professional and responsible on the part of a corporate director. In Ukraine, by law, you can't serve on the same board for more than 12 years, because after that, independence is lost. But actually, again, coming back to that internal code of a corporate director that I sort of write for myself, I think that more than 5 years, well, okay, in some cases, if there are major transformational processes, it might be up to 7 years, but on average, staying more than 5 years at the same company is probably not quite right. You need to make changes, you need to bring in new knowledge, new perspectives from new people.
And this also includes changes in the composition of the board, the requirements and needs of the company and the business itself, as well as the expectations placed on the board. By the way, what expertise is currently the most valuable for potential board members?
It seems to me that there are certain areas of expertise that have always been in demand for decades and will continue to be just as sought after in the future. And there are those that are connected to technological development. The unchanging one is strategic expertise, and perhaps another equally constant one is expertise in talent management, human capital, how to build teams and structures for the effective development and operation of a company. As for technology, we understand AI, digitalization, in other words, all the technologies that are emerging cannot bypass boards, and they need to be quickly adopted and implemented. And this also changes the composition of the board. We worked together on a board when we invited a specialist in transformation, specifically digital transformation. And the dynamic changed so much for us, the work became very effective.
Recently, the CEO of a large foreign company operating in Ukraine reached out to me, specifically the subsidiary of this large foreign company, and this person was concerned about how useful her expertise would be for the boards of Ukrainian companies. Of course, I encouraged her by saying that extensive management experience is always very valuable, and in any case, her experience would be appreciated by many boards. On the other hand, there are probably some areas of expertise for which there isn't much demand on boards.
When it comes to C-level positions, it's hard for me to say which area of expertise might be unnecessary. Generally, people who join boards are those who first and foremost have management experience, and their specific functional expertise sometimes plays only a secondary role. If a person is a very strong manager, they can contribute knowledge and experience specifically from their management expertise. If you go through the functions in a typical executive board, it's hard for me to say which one might be uninteresting, because the board works with executives and it inevitably influences all functions. For example, HR expertise. Especially now, this is one of the most popular and in-demand areas of expertise on the board. Finance, always required. It's really a must-have. Just like strategic expertise, right? Financial expertise will never disappear from the board's list of needs. Legal is the essential one. Marketing, communications, and reputation building are becoming increasingly popular now, and there are even dedicated experts with this background on boards.
Iryna, what advice could you give to our listeners who would like to try themselves in the role of a board member? And now they are hesitating, wondering whether it makes sense and whether they have the opportunity to do this.
Talk to those who are already working there, but talk to them not from the perspective of how great it is, but from the perspective of what's not so good, what challenges there are, what the downsides are. If there's something negative, it doesn't necessarily have to be there. And after you hear not only this, not just see the bright facade of a reputable corporate director, but also get a look behind the scenes where things aren't so shiny, then perhaps your dream might change. And besides talking, do read up as well. Really dive deep into this. Take the time and try to search for information about boards, about corporate governance. Again, look at different cases, not just the successful ones, but the successful ones too. That will be inspiring. And after that, if your enthusiasm hasn't faded, go ahead and start preparing, learning, and we'll be waiting for you to join our ranks.
By the way, does UCGA or CGPA offer such consulting? Well, probably yes. Both UCGA or CGPA are involved in training on the one hand, and on the other hand, they are hubs for professional communities. There are probably people there who could give valuable career advice.
Well, first of all, UCGA or CGPA are the only platforms around which you can find corporate directors. We don't have any other groups or platforms yet, so you can definitely find people there who will give advice, share their experience, or you can simply reach out to the leadership of either of these institutions. They are absolutely open and progressive. I have worked very productively with both institutions. I have served on their boards, and I am confident that you will not be left without support. And I definitely recommend studying at both institutions.
Iryna, thank you very much for participating in the interview. I'm sure that the insights and recommendations provided will be extremely valuable for potential candidates, boards of directors, and for anyone considering a transition from an executive to a non-executive career. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well for the interesting conversation. It's always a pleasure and a benefit to communicate and work with you. I'm happy that we've known each other for a long time and have worked together. And if our advice proves useful for current or potential candidates, what could be better than that?
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. See you on our channel.